Aloha and welcome to Thumbing Through Yesterday, the podcast where we take our favorite books off the shelf, dust them off, and remind ourselves why it is we love them so. Joining me today is my droog, Tony Pasculi. How you doing, Tony?
I'm good. I feel like I should respond in NADSAT, but I don't have anything prepared.
I had days to think about that. Of course, I'm Tom Galley, and today we are talking about one of Tony's favorites,
A Clockwork Orange. And I have to say right off the bat, this is not one of my favorites. I picked it as sort of a companion piece to 1984, and because it was a book I wanted to read again. It had been on my mind recently. I was talking to a friend who speaks Russian, and I know the Russian slang in this book really fascinated me, and I hadn't read it in quite some time, and I wanted to revisit it. But it's not a favorite. At least the definition I've been working with is a book that you pull down, you return to again and again and again. And I think I've only read this once before. And yeah, so it was good to revisit it, but having read it a second time, I can confidently say that it's still not one of my favorites.
Well, it actually is one of mine. I keep a dystopian reading list. It's a short list, about 5 or 6 books, and this is on there. I've definitely read it 3 or 4 times, maybe even as many as 5.
That is incredible. We have such different taste in books.
That's what makes this work.
Yeah. So that said, despite the fact that it's not a favorite, it's a remarkable book. It's well worth reading. I did appreciate the chance to dive back into it. Burgess is an incredible writer. And it has some interesting parallels to 1984, which we talked about last time.
Yep. In particular, both of these books are just heavily concerned with alternate language.
Yes.
In a way, it's the same usage of it. It's a tool of power from one group to another, right? The fact that the youth, there was a term for them, I've already lost it, but they communicate through the NADSAT.
Yeah.
And, on the 1984 side, the party members communicating through Newspeak. But this is a way to separate them from not them.
Yeah. So it's interesting. And it's, having read this book before we talked about 1984 is one of the things that made me skeptical of the inner party's plan to control the populace by imposing a language on them, because language is very organic and it bubbles up from below. And a sort of, if you try to impose a language from on top, you'll get even more resistance from the youth, from the young people. One of the things they always want to do is they want to rebel, they want to differentiate themselves, and language is one of the tools that they use to do that. And that's true today, and it's especially true in this book.
Yep.
So
this, the NADSAT, and again, I've read the book before, but it takes a certain amount of determination to stick with the book for the first couple of chapters before you've had enough exposure to start soaking in words by context.
It really does. It's quite off-putting. There's a lot of it.
There is a lot of it. And there are a couple of words that, despite finishing the novel, I didn't ever get a clear idea of exactly what they meant, but I figured they were, it was relatively insignificant.
Did you resort to a glossary at all?
I did not. I resisted the term. The
Good for
idea.
you.
Okay, well, you know what? I'll be completely forthcoming here. I was reading this on the Kindle, and the first time I came to a NADSAT word that contextually I couldn't puzzle out, I did push the button to see if it would pop up.
That was very unsatisfying.
Well, what it popped up and it said was, NADSAT is a fictional language made up by merchants. I know that part. I want to know what this word meant.
I actually referred to a glossary because it was just driving me nuts. You really can get most of these words. I would say 70 or 80% of them you can get from context pretty clearly, but you're never quite sure. It's like, I think that plechos, I think it means shoulders, but what if it means something else? What if it, like gloopy? Does gloopy mean stupid? Does it mean bad? I think it means stupid. Yeah. But I really needed that sort of certainty to just latch onto a word and go, aha, so I could proceed comfortably. So I did go back to the glossary a couple of times.
One does what one must.
Yeah. So one of the reasons I was initially fascinated by this book is the NADSAT. The language I thought was remarkable. I thought Burgess was so clever for doing it the way he did by drawing on Russian words. And in particular, I think the only one that I really remembered, and I give Burgess a lot of credit for this and probably too much, is the NADSAT word horror show, which derives from the Russian word horosho, which means good, and they turned it into the English compound word horror show, which is not only clever but a commentary on what good is if you're a teenager.
Indeed.
Yeah, and they actually make a specific pun along those lines somewhere later in the book, and I thought that is just genius. That is so smart and so clever, and that and things like milk with knives in it and ultraviolence and 20 to 1. And yet, as I'm reading through this a second time, a lot of the words are not nearly that clever and sort of frustratingly bad, I want to say.
Well, I didn't count, but I would guess that the NADSAT vocabulary in there is something on the order of 300 words. And I think that's asking an awful lot of cleverness to expect all of them to have that degree of insightfulness. And
they don't need to be clever. What I found frustrating was rhythmically the language didn't work for me. That there are certain things that you expect from slang language, and I think most of this could be considered a slang or an argot. That you want words to simplify, to be mellifluous, to be easier to say, unless you're specifically calling something out by bringing attention to it. Because the NADSAT teens also sort of go into a heightened speech, which is almost Shakespearean at times. Mm-hmm. But almost always, the substitute word that is drawn from Russian has more syllables than the English word. And that's usually not how slang works. Usually slang gets shorter and simpler rather than clunkier and longer. So, yeah.
Yep. I don't know. It definitely is it definitely adds a layer of challenge to the appreciation of the book.
It does. And it's interesting, Burgess talks about that in his introduction. He says it's deliberate, that it gives you, it's almost the Brechtian Verfremdung effect where it creates an emotional distance from the subject matter because you're kept at a remove because of your limited understanding because of the vocabulary.
Yep. In a way, it kind of reminded me of studying a foreign language when you pick up a book that's just a step above your comprehension level, and you're getting the majority of the content, but constantly there's I don't know that word, I don't know that conjugation, I don't know, stop, flip, flip, flip. Yeah. Okay, got it, flip, flip, flip.
Yeah. So I think one of the things we need to talk about, we don't need to talk about it right now, but chapter 21.
Well, let's go ahead and hit it. So this is one of those things, and again, I'm not exactly sure where I picked up, what book are we talking about? A Clockwork Orange. I don't remember when I picked it up the very first time. I'm pretty sure it was during high school years. And again, I'm pretty sure it's something I brushed up against, not something I was required to read. But that version of it had 20 chapters, being, an American published book, and it had no introduction, no explanation that it should have anything other than 20 chapters. In fact, it's relatively recent in life, maybe as recently as 10 years ago, that I discovered there was an omitted chapter. It might have even been more recent than that, but we were screening A Clockwork Orange as part of a class. I was showing it to students and doing a little bit of research so I could talk knowledgeably about it. I made this discovery that Kubrick had used the truncated version. So all this time, I have really been interested in eventually discovering what this 21st chapter was about, because apparently, Alex abandons his old ways and becomes a more productive member of society and all of these things. So finally, for this reading, I get to read that 21st chapter.
And what was did it satisfy?
It was, okay, for the buildup that I've laid out here, it was disappointing, terribly, terribly disappointing.
I have to agree.
It's the way that I read about it in third-party reviews and whatnot. I expected it would have a middle-aged Alex.
He's 18.
He's 18. He's not older. He's 18. He got out of prison. He went straight back to, he got cured. He got uncured. He went straight back to being in a gang. Mm-hmm. And then he had a bad day.
Yeah.
He just didn't feel like going out and busting up the jewelry shop. And maybe he wants a son.
Yeah.
That's it. This is it. This is not redemption. This is not change. This is not maturation. He had a bad day.
It is. It's a wart on the book. And I have to say, I think Burgess's American publisher was right. That without that final chapter, The book has a sort of punch and impact of he's a bad dude, and people say, no, we can fix him. And society says, no, that's bad. We're going to put him back. And he's like, screw you, society.
The triumphant ending of this book is that we have re-released this sociopath on the streets, and we've given him a job.
Yes.
Through
some sort of misguided sense of justice. Yeah, we're going to let this man be free to do his evil in the world.
I agree. Whatever Anthony was trying to pull off with that 21st chapter, he flubbed it.
He missed the mark. And you said, it's this maturation process. Obviously, there's no maturation at all. He's 18. He's not even close to mature. But it's, if that's where he's going with it, I think your entire third act needs to be that. Your first act is young Alex, 15. Your second act is Alex, going through the process and out again. And your third act, which would be fascinating, but Burgess didn't do this, is let's have 7 entire chapters of what this guy's like when he's 40. That would be amazing.
That would be amazing.
But you can't do it. It's like an appendix. It's like this little at the end.
Yeah, what he pulled off, what he tried didn't work.
Yeah.
But even if, I don't know. It just was, especially having this thing built up, knowing that, oh my gosh, the American left off a chapter and the author, he let it happen because he was desperate for the $200 royalty, the $200 prepayment advance on the book. So he let it,
Yeah, life of a writer.
Oh man!
Of course, that was back in
$200 used to be money.
Well, not much, maybe $2,000. Yeah. So
rent, perhaps
rent for a month or two. Yeah.
And then the amount of the version that I downloaded has got both an introductory essay which contains part of Burgess' writings on the subject, and man, has he got a lot of anger on the topic of that 21st chapter being cut off.
And this book in general, I don't know, have you read anything else by Burgess?
He laments the fact that this is what people know him for. And in fact, he laments the fact that he's known as a writer. He's a composer in his mind.
Fascinating.
So, yeah, we remember him, but we remember him for all the wrong things, apparently. But yeah, I have, other than this book, I have been exposed to no works by Burgess that I remember.
The only thing I've ever looked at by him, he wrote an annotated version of James Joyce's Ulysses, which is fascinating because it's a kind of, Ulysses is a book that plays with language to an extreme that Clockwork Orange is just approaching. Yeah. And I thought, well, what a perfect person to sort of be a companion into a Ulysses. And even with his assistant, Ulysses is just impenetrable. I don't know how people read that book. Yeah, that's the only thing I'm aware of that he's written. So yeah. Sorry, Tony. Yeah. Well, so Alex for most of the book until the last chapter is 15. And the first time I run into that was shocking. You talk about being startled in 1984. This startled me. It's like 15? This kid is 15? That is really, really young. He's the leader of his gang. All the rest of his gang are older than him.
He's the youngest, but yet the leader.
Yeah, and he is just relentlessly violent. He's awful to his parents. He's awful to his friends. He's a shit show from beginning to end, this kid.
And this is something that I think Kubrick dropped the ball on when he made the film.
Yes.
Because in the movie, he flinches from so many scenes in which Alex is borderline inhuman, and he turns them into almost comic things. The 2 young girls that he picks up at the music store come to mind, right? In the book, these are 10-year-old children.
Yep.
He is smiley and nice. He gets them home. He feeds them soda with alcohol in it until they're so drunk they can't realize what's going on. He injects himself with a performance-enhancing drug, and he rapes them repeatedly in extended time, long enough that they get to sober up and realize what's going on, at which point he just leaves them to wander out the door.
Yeah.
And yet in the movie, the young ladies are young ladies. They might not be, age of consent, but they're certainly not 10-year-old girls, and then we get this time-lapse orgy set to the William Tell overture. He flinches away from these moments where Alex is at his most brutal, and as a result in the movie, Alex becomes a sympathetic character, at least marginally sympathetic character. Whereas in the book, there's just nothing redeemable about him.
I think that's important. I think it's important that he not be a sympathetic character.
Yeah.
I don't think you want to be rooting for him to be free at the end. I think that's a mistake. And honestly, I think it's a mistake with Burgess's last chapter as well, that he's the idea that he can be redeemed, that he can't be redeemed. Yeah.
Well, I mean, if he can be redeemed, it's going to take years.
Decades.
Yeah. And, having a bad day, not feeling like busting up the china shop is not redemption. Yeah. Thinking about having a son is not redemption. And even when he thinks about having the son, he's got a certain fatality. He's like, my son's going to grow up to be a shit like me.
Yeah.
His son's going to grow up to be a shit like him. That last chapter does not drive anything home. It does not reinforce anything we're exposed to, but it doesn't do a satisfactory job of giving us anything new.
Yeah. So I think, I'm not a fan of the film. I didn't go back and watch the film again. I've only seen it once. I didn't care for it at all. I think it's one of Kubrick's lesser works. And as you say, I mean, he avoids the consequences that you couldn't show that film. If you filmed this book, it would be X-rated for one, and no one would watch it for two.
Well, it was actually X-rated when it was made.
Was it really? The film was X-rated? Or unrated?
X-rated X. It was X-rated. A little bit of history here.
Yeah.
When the MPAA came up with the original movie ratings, they neglected to copyright or trademark, whichever is appropriate.
X. Yeah.
X was reserved for films with adult themes.
Yeah.
And it was a legitimate rating. And there are movies that were rated X at the time. Clockwork Orange was one. Midnight Cowboy, I think, was another. Blue Velvet.
Yeah.
And these were not pornographies, right? But because at some point some pornographer realized they didn't trademark that, I can use it, suddenly it lost. So now NC-17 is the new X. But at the time Clockwork Orange was made, it was an X-rated movie.
Interesting. Well, that's a fun little piece of trivia. I'm saying, well, it would have been, if you filmed this book today, it would be rated X by today's standards and not NC-17. And no one would watch it. It is, again, unrelentingly bleak. There is no hope in this book. This is another book without hope. Yeah. Wow. Which again is one reason it's not one of my favorites. I don't care for that in a book for the most part. That's a book. Again, favorite is so different from good, or a book that you appreciate, or a book that is worthwhile, or a book that you should read. A favorite to me is a book you return to willingly and lovingly and often. And that is not this book.
I will not say lovingly, but I do return to this book with some regularity. Maybe every 4 or 5 years, I feel moved to read it again.
Or a glutton for punishment.
Maybe so.
Well, you like these broken characters, and Alex is, broken in multiple ways, multiple times.
I don't know that. Maybe flawed is a better word for Alex, because when I think broken, I think something that started whole.
Interesting.
Right. When we did the real story, Angus Thermopylae had very little chance to be whole as an infant, but he was clearly broken. He had been shaped into what he was. Alex, we don't have any hint that he was ever anything other than what he is.
I would say that he gets broken by his treatment. He is, from his own perspective, he's broken at that point.
That's true.
So...
And another subtle but important difference is, in the books, and you can see in the books the variety of classical music that Burgess uses. It is Burgess. Uses is very varied. Different pieces of music, different composers. In the Kubrick film, it's always Beethoven. And it's always the fifth. He really simplified that down, but you can see the composer side of Burgess peeking through. If you're aware of that, and say, oh, okay, this really is somebody that knows his music. But the fact that Alex has music ruined for him, he has music ruined for him, not just the fifth.
Yes. It's kind of fascinating that Alex has such interesting musical taste, and that's never really explored. It's just something we're presented with.
Yeah.
And it is unusual. When he goes to the record shop, it's the girls are just looking at him like, what are you doing, you weirdo? And the guy behind the counter is like, okay, dude, his friends don't appreciate his music.
Yep.
So where did this musical taste come from? It's kind of fascinating.
Actually, that ties into something you said earlier. A lot of times, well, not a lot of times, but several times through the book, the language of the gang ascends, particularly in Alex, to almost Shakespearean. Yeah. There is an intellect and an education at work here in Alex that we're given no indication of where it came from.
Yeah.
It certainly didn't come from his parents, from his P&M. We don't get any indication
are idiots.
They're low functioning at best.
Yeah.
We know that he's blown off school, at least, for the last couple of years. I don't know, maybe he's a grade schooler.
That's a good point. Clearly, Alex is an intelligent guy. He has the capability of, he's got poor impulse control, but he's clearly high functioning and quite bright. He can reason through things. He just chooses not to often. Mm-hmm. And he is very clever with his language, and has enormous appreciation for classical music. So, yeah.
I don't know. We're not ever given to understand where that came from.
Yeah. Oh, so here's the thing. So this is a sort of a story that Alex is telling for someone else's benefit. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And we're not clear who that is. And the final chapter does allude to that a little bit more than the rest. But he does throughout say, refer to himself as your humble narrator. He breaks the fourth wall as he talks about, and then this is what happened, and this is what is going to happen, and and that doesn't actually, I'm not sure if that lands anywhere. I think it lands a little bit more in the last chapter than in the previous 20, and then it's just a device. In the last chapter, he says, and now you're caught up, and you can't follow me beyond this point. So I did like that about the last chapter, but that was all.
So it was not irredeemable.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. You're right. We're not given a solid explanation of what the context of that fourth wall break is.
Yeah, who's this being addressed to?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe the movie actually does a slightly better job of that. Slightly. Yeah.
And then there was one word that stood out to me that is not a piece of NADSAT. It's an invention of Alex's in the moment, a piece of slang that he coins that actually kind of calls back to 1984. There's this minister who's involved in this program, and he keeps saying the minister of the interior or the minister of the inferior, and it seemed like kind of a stale joke. And then at one point he calls him int inf min, which is a sort of a coinage of interior, inferior ministry of compressed together in very much the same way as Newspeak is done. Yeah. So that was fascinating. But that's, as far as I can tell, that is the only instance of that in the book. Yeah.
I didn't see anything jump out that said Newspeak to me, but
yeah.
That was a good example thereof. There was I don't know if it was one moment or two moments that I noted. I think it was one moment that I noted twice. This made me giggle because, and at that time you couldn't get hold of a poggy, whatever that was, brothers, right? Alex gives us a parenthetical aside because he doesn't understand a word this drunk guy is saying. It's like, and yet his language is 30% NADSAT,
Yeah.
It just seemed ironic to me, and
That's not.
There aren't very many moments of levity in this book, but that was definitely one.
Yeah. So NADSAT, by the way, this is my understanding from the glossary, that NADSAT is the word or the particle that you put at the end of a number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, or 8, or 9 to make it 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. So it would be 1 NADSAT would be 11, 5 NADSAT would be 15. So NADSAT means teen in a sense in Russian.
Well, that's nice and tidy.
So that's what they call the kids. They call the kids NADSATs, and then they call the language they speak NADSAT. So that's where that comes from. Another thing that was interesting related to language or unrelated to language is when they go to prison, they get stripped of their names and they get called by numbers. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was fascinating, especially in the context of the chaplain trying to determine whether man can be good or bad if his choice is taken away from him, if you do not have free will, can you be good or bad? And as he's having this conversation with Alex, he's referring to him by his number. And it's just like, that's the irony so thick.
We will strip you of your humanity, but question whether or not you can be good or not.
It is an interesting question, though. It's a question that I think, it's there. It's posed more as a discussion question for your reading club by the book. Yeah. Burgess doesn't dive into it too deeply. He just he presents this context, he reverses it, and people sort of talk around it a little bit. But Burgess doesn't dive into it too deeply. And it's a shame because it is a fascinating question.
I guess that's not what he wanted to write about. But one of the things semi-related to that, of course, the intellectuals who rescue Alex at the end, they're on that bandwagon. But and this is a deviation again from the film. In Kubrick's version, Alex actually finds safe haven, and then he blows it for himself by singing. In the bathtub, and then the guy realizes, oh my God, this is the guy who raped my wife and beat me so brutally years ago. In the book, they're planning to kill him from the get-go. Now the guy ends up figuring out who Alex is, but that doesn't really come into the decision. They had already shoved him off to be, to the upstairs bedroom before Bob puzzled it through.
Yeah.
Killing Alex was always on their agenda.
He's a tool. He's a tool for either side. So, which is again pretty discouraging and pretty typical of dystopia. You have no value as an individual, only as a cog in the machine. And which machine is it? Yeah, whose purpose do you serve?
Ministry of Peace, Ministry of Truth. Oh, wrong book. Sorry.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But I think it's a shame that Burgess doesn't dive into that question more, because I really, it's I'm talking about another book that we're not talking about right now, but Jekyll and Hyde. Jekyll and Hyde is a book that dives into this. So you have this other personality that emerges who is much, much freer. And I don't know if Hyde actually thinks about this, or this is something I thought about when I read the book, or Jekyll thinks about this. But Jekyll is bound by society and by rules and by expectations in a way that Hyde is not. So is Jekyll really a good man and Hyde is his evil side, or is Jekyll just a bound man and Hyde the free man? And the freedom was the evil was there all along, unable to express itself until it had that ability to go out and be independent. So
you've seen the BBC series Jekyll, I'm sure.
I have not. Is it good?
It is fantastic, and it really spends a lot of time on this question. And it comes up with a very unexpected answer for this particular instance.
Don't spoil it for me.
I don't intend to, yeah. I think that you will enjoy that.
I love it. Yeah, good. Excellent. Man, I don't know if I have anything else on this book.
Yeah, I took very few notes. Let me check over my very few notes. Did it?
I highlighted a thing that I want to read for people who haven't read the book and are wondering what NADSAT is like. This is a passage of Alex talking. I had this when I idioted into the lit up room saying, hi, at last we meet. Our brief gavarite through the letter hole was not, shall we say, satisfactory. Yes, let us admit not, oh verily not, you stinking starry old sharp. Yeah, and that and that is one that gets that sort of elevated grammar. And yet the brutality of it, the baseness of it, and the weird language substitutions, starry for old, and gavarite for discussion or talking.
Itty for go.
Itty for go, yes, exactly.
I liked that one.
Yeah.
For a while I contemplated, I'm just going to start telling everybody I'm going to itty off now.
Got to itty off out of here.
Yep.
Yeah.
One thing to mention this earlier, talking about the three acts of the book, the three structures, I did appreciate the fact that all three acts started exactly the same way. Right. So what's it going to be then?
Right. I didn't catch that. That's
and in
good.
fact, the first and the third book literally start the same way. It's in the same bar. It's the same conversation. The characters are new.
Yes.
But they're doing the same thing. They're drinking the milk with knives. They're planning what to do with the evening. The middle act happens in prison, so it's a little bit different. It's the chaplain lecturing at them, but still, it's a beautiful parallel structure. The book starts the same way. Each act starts the same way.
I love the idea of milk with knives in it too.
Yeah.
That these teenage boys are drinking milk, but the milk is spiked with, I don't even know what it's spiked with, Synthamesk or
They gave us
Adrenochrome
Drincrom there were 3 or 4 names that they tossed out, and the hint that there were other options.
Yeah.
But the one that they chose was to heighten the senses and make you ready for a bit of the old ultraviolence.
Yeah, sharpen you up. Ready for a bit of 20-1, actually, which until this read through, I thought was another synonym for ultraviolence. I thought 20-1 meant 20 of you and your droogs ganging up on some lowly individual.
That's what I think it is. So you've come up with a new interpretation.
No, so it's actually, I read that it's supposed to be rhyming slang. It's fun. 20-1 is just fun.
Oh, okay.
So their idea of fun often involves beating and kicking some helpless individual. But that's, if they mean that specifically, then they talk about ultraviolence. So 20-1 is just fun.
All righty then.
Yeah. Anything else?
Nothing really comes to mind.
Oh, this is hardly relevant.
Excellent. Let's go there.
But it stood out to me. I think this is in that final chapter. He talks about 3 devochkas dressed up in the height of Nadsat fashion. That is to say, long uncombed hair dyed white and false grudies, boobs, sticking out a meter or so in front of them.
He saw Madonna in the future. He saw Madonna coming. Right?
WTF, even Madonna didn't have a meter of fake boobs. That's insane.
Yeah.
So my
the height of fashion, that was something I had noted, but he's very obsessed with this, right?
Yeah.
And almost every description contains somebody who's in the height of fashion. Even when he's in prison, he's in the height of prison fashion.
Yes.
And then and he proceeds to describe what the height of fashion is.
And the fashion, I want to say the fashion in this book is largely appalling, but it is very appropriate, and it is it's not chosen in any practical way. It's not chosen to be anything good. It's just something that's it. That's of the moment, and we're all going to do it. Like the cod pieces, the weird cod pieces under tights. Just bizarre spider-shaped cod piece. Yeah.
One thing that I did appreciate reading through this was that Kubrick really made an effort to stick close to those visual descriptions. It was close, obviously close. I mean, he didn't go off on his own completely.
Yeah.
Apparently, and I don't know if this is actually true or not, because I'm reading this from the afterwards by other people and by Burgess in the download that I got. But apparently the movie was not shot with a script in a normal sense. Apparently they would read through the chapter, they would sit around and discuss and come up with more or less an improv based on the chapter, and then develop that into the scene.
No wonder I hate that movie so much.
And the reason I come back to the movie periodically is not that it's on my favorite list, but it persists in sitting in the AFI's top 100 list. So when I pull movies to show in class, periodically I cycle through it.
You can't always trust the critics. Yeah.
We can talk about, oh bother. The movie about the newspaper
Citizen
Kane, supposedly the best piece of American cinema ever made.
Wow, I would disagree with that.
Yawn.
I think it's a worthwhile movie.
It's a decent enough movie, and you can appreciate there were accomplishments which at the time were impressive. Yeah. But the number 1 list of AFI's all-time best movie, I'm sorry.
Come on, not in a world where The Godfather exists.
We should start a parallel podcast, for film discussions. But
sure.
Anyway, all right.
Clockwork Orange. That's it. Done and done. What's up next?
Next, we are going to jump back firmly into the realm of sci-fi with a little C.S. Friedman, The Madness Season.
I am looking forward to this because this is not an author or a book that I'm familiar with at all, and it is always great to be exposed to brand new works, brand new to me, I assume.
Can't wait to hear what you think of it in 2 weeks.
Looking forward to it.